Welcome to 3 Point Cyber, a podcast about cybersecurity topics and events for the layperson. The ideas, opinions, and discussions of this podcast are those of the host, co-host, and guest, and do not necessarily represent the views of their respective employers or affiliates. Recording and propagation of this podcast is highly encouraged as long as an acknowledgement is given to the ownership. Music and graphics used in the podcast and promotional materials cannot be used in other events not tied to the podcast without the express written consent from Alpha Omega Advisors. Andrew, we've got a lot of podcasts under our belt now.
Yes, we do. And I think we're double minting this one.
We are. We have a couple of guests on today. Is that what you're in reference to?
It is. It is.
Good. I'm excited about these two gentlemen. I've known them for a while, and we've had lunch together. We've discussed a lot of things together, and I think they're going to have some good things to say. And hopefully, you as a listener will take something away from this. And as always, at the end of the podcast, we'll try to summarize at least the 3 points that we'd like for you to take away. Andrew, talk to me a little bit, since it's been 2 weeks since the last episode was released. What's going on with you?
Well, it has been a while. I got an email a couple days ago that made me think of you, and it was from the IRS. So they gave their tax preparers recommendations on hiring cybersecurity professionals, and I'll go through real quick just the 4 things that they said. They said, ask for recommendations, by talking to other tax professionals. Be selective, hire a professional you feel comfortable with and trust. Do interviews, ask about their level of experience in data and systems protection, so on and so forth. And then finally, make it official by securing an agreement or engagement letter that details the terms of the service provided.
And
that's they're emailed out, to tax professionals recommendations on this. You may have some thoughts on this and some recommendations for them how to better.
So I'm more curious. Was there an attachment with those recommendations?
No, this was actually an IRS. Yeah, I did check that.
Really?
It was a .gov, but no, there was no attachment.
That's a new one. I haven't heard that one. I didn't realize
realize
they were reaching out for that. I didn't realize they were doing things like that now. That's kind of a scary thing. If they're starting to do kind of email campaigns like that, that means a lot more spammers and scammers are going to start doing the same thing. Because all it would take with that one would be for them to attach what they told you at the very last one as an attachment, and that attachment's the malicious event. Yeah,
there we go.
Yeah, that's crazy. That's crazy.
Just when you think there can't be a new threat vector.
Right. Yep. There's always going to be threat vectors, Michael. It's just always.
Yep.
I guess that's why it keeps us in job security. Today's episode, we're going to be talking about information technology and operational technology security, which in our terms, it's IT and OT. Basically, a lot of people, including people in the field, in cyber and in IT, they don't really understand what the difference between the two is in a lot of cases, and therein lies some of the problems. So we're going to talk about what the difference is between IT and OT security is, and what companies are doing, and some of the best practices around that, and that's why I brought these two gentlemen in. They're in the field, they're very good, and they can get their points across rather quickly. So hopefully we're going to have a good episode. So let me introduce the very first one here. Jeremy Rasmussen is the CTO CISO for Abacode. He has 25 years in developing secure solutions, IT security services, and in cybersecurity education. Jeremy was an adjunct professor for USF, the University of South Florida, for 20 years, and is currently serving as an external advisory board member for the USF Computer Science and Engineering program. Along with him, which I'm excited to have because normally I can't get 2 guys from the same company on at the same time. Michael Ferris is the CEO for Abacode for the past 7 years, and he's joining us as well, and I'm excited about having the CEO on the program. He is also a present U.S. National Judge for Ernst & Young's Entrepreneur of the Year program, which I'll probably have him to say just a little bit about that one before we get off the episode so everyone knows what that entrepreneur program is. So Abacode is a next generation managed cybersecurity and compliance service provider that's based out of Tampa. I'll have to ask the gentleman to tell me how large they are as far as clients go. They are very well known, and I have trusted them to do a lot of things. So right after this, we'll bring Jeremy and Michael on. Well, we're back, and now it's time to bring on Jeremy and Michael. So now let's get into the heart of our program here. We're going to talk about IT and OT security. For those that are wondering what IT is, that's information technology. That's basically your everyday computer use, computer assets that are in companies and in homes that a user sits down and does something with. So it's a user to me, it's an user interaction. OT is operational technology. That's all the assets that is in behind the scenes in companies that, such as, even in homes, actually, your connected devices, such as your thermostat.
Routers.
Routers will be an OT. In larger organizations, it could be thermostats in refrigerations. It could be, there's so much. I'm not even.
It could be sensors, right?
Yeah.
Sensors inside of a manufacturing plant, right?
So basically, it's devices that where users, it's not normal for users to have interaction with the devices. It's stuff that operates the company in the background. Elevators are a good one. New elevators, air conditioning, HVAC systems are considered OT. Anything that is basically automated by technology. That's what OT is. That's hence why they're also called industrial control systems. So let's get on in here. Jeremy, I'm speaking too much here as the host. I need you to jump in here. Why don't you kind of give us a real quick how you would relay what OT is?
Sure. So I do have some specific knowledge about embedded security. I've taught embedded security at the university and also mobile and wireless security for USF for years. And I have some specific experience in doing some consulting with a smart home, connected home devices manufacturer, as well as advising on embedding security into medical sensor devices. So I definitely understand some of the real issues there is that you have limited processing power, memory, computing cycles and everything. So accomplishing security is more difficult. For one thing, if you think about a regular computer, it stores a lot of audit log information. So there's ways you can go back and look through the data and find out what happened, for forensic analysis. Such data doesn't exist on embedded devices, right? So you're a lot of times wondering what's going on with them. And so monitoring them becomes more of a challenge. I'll give you some trivia here because I'm a trivia kind of guy. My claim to fame was I got to go on Jeopardy a few years ago, and it actually won one day. So one day champion on Jeopardy. But here's my trivia is, thank you. The term Internet of Things was coined back in 1999 by a guy from MIT named Kevin Ashton. All right. So that's where the term first came from. I've heard Internet of, out there as well. I don't know when that term was coined. The more recently Internet of SH,
Yep, we know what you're talking about.
By last year, they were thinking there was probably something like 50 billion connected devices. So an average of something like 6 devices per person on the whole planet. And now we have this thing called 5G or LTE computing, high speed data throughput for broadband wireless. So now you have this issue of, potentially sensors everywhere. So I think of that as almost kind of a privacy issue, who's watching us and what are they doing with all of the data? And it's, it has opened kind of all new horizons for, home living and medical and healthcare and automated factories and self-driving cars and supply chain logistics, deliveries, transportation, all that. That's the awesome part of it. The scary part is, the surveillance potentially everywhere. And the idea that these devices are not necessarily built with security in mind. They're trying to get stuff out to market quickly. They're just trying to market presence and having the device out there. That's their number one job. Security is often an afterthought. And so there's really not great security standards for embedded, operational technology devices. this is a repeated problem we see over and over, is that they'll create a special slimmed down version of an operating system that has fewer features in it. And a lot of times the things that get cut are the security features. So you're trying to fit this thing inside of an embedded devices with, a device with limited processing power, memory, and storage. And so security is often the thing that gets cut. And then you create a library because you don't want to keep writing the same software and over. So let's just say Linksys routers or somebody like that, TP-Link routers, home Wi-Fi routers, they'll create this one library of code and they'll use it over and over for all their devices. So now the bugs get propagated to all their devices. So what have we seen? The fallout from that? Remember a few years ago, webcams were taken over and used on a massive distributed denial of service attack against Dyn, which was an internet hosting company. I think they've been bought by Oracle since then. But they, for a while we saw eBay and Twitter and Amazon all down for hours. Because they had used these webcams in a concerted attack. They used other computers as well, but it was the first time we'd seen on a massive scale people using IoT devices to go after a victim. So that's kind of the scary part, of IoT.
Yeah, I think, Jeremy, the one of the points that you had made there was that these devices are typically consumer-based devices, which means companies are going to make money off the product. And a lot of times what suffers when those are developed is the security behind them. And usually security is an afterthought. So real quick, just for the benefit of some of the listeners, let's take for instance, because a lot of people don't understand how some of these could be dangerous and how they could be used. So for instance would be, if let's say a user has put something in their home, a thermostat, for instance, a Nest thermostat,
right.
And I'm not taking any particular company, I'm not pulling out any particular company. I just
right.
use it because everybody knows what Nest is. A thermostat in there. How could you actually use something like that to do something nefarious?
Right. So a use case I've seen before is a remotely controlled microwave oven. Say you wanted to turn on at a certain time and cook your TV dinner at a certain temperature setting. If you were able to take over the control, say you have that connected to your Alexa, something like that, and you have somebody who's able to get on your home's local area network and issue a random command to that device, they could make the microwave oven turn on and heat up and then cause some kind of fire. That's worst case scenario there. Just taking over your thermostat, I can't think of one there other than if they're able to monitor when your thermostat's coming on and off, assumedly you have it off during the day when you're out of the house and on when you're home. They could know when you're there and when you're not and come steal stuff from you, right? If they're able to figure that out, they could figure out when you're home or not. So that's one thing.
And that's what I'm looking for, because people, in our field, we have to be creative of thinking of things, because that's what the threat actors do. They look at every little thing that they could potentially use as a benefit to whatever they want to carry out. And if I can get a pattern of when you're home and I'm planning on something against you or your family, that's exactly how I'm going to do it. I'm going to do that reconnaissance against your entire infrastructure of even your home. Now, I'm also going to be quick to say that that's not that common of thing that occurs, but it is a probability. It is something that can happen. And the more that people understand that everything that's attached to the internet is a potential window into something that can be used in a bad way, then there's always that probability of it being used that way. And that's kind of why I want to bring up this topic of operational technology security.
Here's what really worries me about these companies is the DevOps process. So for the uninitiated, DevOps is development operations. When you're building something, you go through the process of, you write it, you design it, you create the components, you write the code, you test it all, and then you integrate it together, and then you release the build out to the public. Well, in the DevOps environment itself, you could be compromised. And we know from working with, some of these very large smart home, connected home developers that a lot of times they'll just acquire a suite of products from other companies. Like they'll have maybe some that they create themselves, and then they'll go and through mergers and acquisitions, go buy some other ones. So they have this whole suite of tools that has no uniform security embedment inside of it. And then they'll use, say, a shared community resource like GitHub or some kind of, software development repository to maintain their code. Well, now you have all kinds of people logging in with their own personal accounts. They're probably, 1099 contractors. They're probably not all employees of the company. So now you have this diverse set of who knows who logging in and having access to the code. And so what happens is things like the SolarWinds attack take place. So if you recall from a couple of years ago, there's a software developer called SolarWinds that does was like network health and status monitoring software. And we think the Russians, we don't know who exactly, Advanced Persistent Threat Group, got in there into their DevOps process and inserted a backdoor so that when they came out with the new updates for their software, whoever went to go download it was downloading just a Trojan horse. And the Trojan horse was then used to provide remote access from this Russian group into anybody who updated the software. So crazy stuff's happening like that all the time, just because we're not protecting our own development environments from keeping people from inserting bad stuff in there.
Yeah, when Jeremy says some crazy stuff's happening, that's really putting it lightly, because we've seen a lot of stuff that you would never believe would happen with technology. And I think that one of the points that he was also making about, a home device like that of potentially causing harm, through that microwave, it's not just even what they could cause harm, it's using the device for even other things, like you mentioned on the cameras, being used as a botnet of devices that could be used to distribute attacks. Or it could even be used as a way of jumping off, getting into the network from that device and then jumping off that device into something else in the network. So there's all kinds of ways that these things can be used if the proper security has not been set up on it. One of the things that I have had heartburn, Jeremy, with a lot of the companies that are putting out these devices to make home automation or to make things, supposedly make people's lives a little easier, is that there's really no guidance in how to properly install them on your home network. The average user goes out and buys them, from the Best Buy or, the other local electronics store and brings them in and just hooks it right up, and they're off and running, and no thought given at all to the security of that device. More often than not, those devices have passwords for the administration side, and they're not even touched. They're just left at default, which means anyone that knows about that device could potentially jump onto your network and get into that device. So that's one of the areas that I think needs to be tightened up a little bit, are the manufacturers giving out just a little more information on how to properly secure those things.
It's a great topic, because it's talking about proactively thinking about security and compliance, right? From the very beginning, from not only kind of the technical aspects of that product, but also the communication, right? The end user, the person in the factory or the facility who's going to install it, or the person at home who's going to install it. Are you also communicating the security protocols that you need to follow?
Yeah, and for the most part, most people don't even know what that is. If you mention security protocols to the average user, they're not going to have a clue of what you're even talking about. So that's why I'm saying I think it's the responsibility of a lot of manufacturers to actually have that information as well. I really do believe that should be part of their product. And unfortunately, it has not been. But I guess the silver lining in a lot of the events that are occurring right now in the cyber world from threats is the fact that there's an awareness that's going on. People are starting to understand that these devices may not necessarily be as secure as they think they are being told, or they think they are. So I think it really is it's a requirement, I do believe, of manufacturers to help spread that right training out there. And I'm a very big believer in security awareness training for everyone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Dave, one of the things that I see companies fail on a lot is including these devices in their security plan. Like a lot of times they'll have a vulnerability management plan for, say, Windows operating system and desktop applications and things like that. But then there's other devices that they completely forget. For example, even firewalls, like firmware updates on firewalls. We got called in on a forensics job last year to a company that did e-commerce, kind of a website where they sold auto parts or something, and they had been hit, and we tried to come in and help them remediate, recover. It wasn't one of our managed services customers at all. It was a referral from a third party. So when we came in and started helping them out, we kept finding that the attackers kept getting back into the system, and they kept creating these administrative users. And we were like, how are they getting back in there? We finally figured out is they had compromised the firewall itself. And when we looked into the vulnerability, this is a patch that had been out for this, a FortiGate firewall, Fortinet, for more than a year, but they had failed to update it. And what it allowed is the attacker, anybody who ever logged into the system, they could get a copy of the user ID and password of that user. And then just recreate it and get in. It was crazy. So once we got that patch, then we were able to get them back up and running. Another area is virtualization software. I don't want to get too deep for the uninitiated, but as you know, Dave, nobody runs, just bare metal servers anymore. It's always virtualized VMware or VirtualBox or whatever, right? And so people forget about that virtualization software. Hey, I'll ask you guys, have you guys updated your home Wi-Fi router software lately? Your firmware for that? Probably not. But are there patches available? Probably there are.
That was
Stuff to
actually
keep
brought up
those
on
things.
I think our very first episode. No, it was our second episode. Yeah,
Yeah.
We were talking about how easy it is to actually get into home routers if you're not paying attention to what you're doing. And I would dare say 99% of the consumers out there don't do that. They bring it in, hook it up, they're working. The only time it's ever paid attention again is if something goes down. Then that's when they just go in and unpower to turn it off and turn it back on, and they're up and running again, so they don't even think about it.
Well, IoT solutions should be included in your formalized policies and security plan. If you're a company, if you're running a company, don't forget that. That's under what I call shadow IT, which is things that might not fall under the traditional, perimeter of your network. Operational technology. I'll even throw social media in there because, right, think of how much of a business is run on social media these days. Use LinkedIn for HR and hiring, use Twitter for help desk support, use Instagram and Facebook for public relations. But do all those fall under IT visibility and control? No, they probably don't have multi-factor authentication turned on. Those accounts are probably easily spoofed or taken over.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's just another area that you have to keep your eyes on. I would say, don't try to do this yourself, and engage with security experts, somebody that can come in and manage a whole program for you, somebody who does this all day, every day, and it's very efficient and is going to be able to see the big picture and help you with that stuff, because you're just never going to be able to get enough coverage from one hiring us. Even if you have a full-time employee on this stuff all the time, that's not going to be enough coverage for you. You're really going to need a whole team. You need somebody who's making sure you align everything with the best practices framework. You need a group that's going to be watching 24/7 around the clock on your network operations and seeing if hackers are trying to come in and being able to stop them. And then you need a group that's doing regular assessments, vulnerability, patching, security scanning, pen testing, to make sure, think like the attacker and make sure you're not leaving any of those holes and flaws exposed. And of course, you got to make sure, like you said, Dave, make sure you don't just ever field out of the box deployments to your network. You got to lock those down, security harden them, don't use the default passwords, make sure they're not lowering the overall security of the rest of your environment.
Exactly. Yeah. Let's go back to what you had mentioned earlier about companies not having OT typically in their overall security plan. And that was what I was thinking about. You're absolutely correct. OT for a long time for most companies, if you're looking at OT in a larger company, a lot of times that technology is not even located in the IT department. It's usually located in the facilities department because they're the ones taking care of everything, right? So those aren't IT people. And therein lies some of the problem. In a perfect world and in companies that were doing it right, at least they would have segmented off networks to do OT if they were doing it right. And what would happen now, or what's happening now, is that OT is becoming more ingrained in regular information technology because you have more users that are needing to get access to different OT devices, that they're now crossing the lines. The line of segmenting off a computer against an OT device, you got a blurry line there, because now you may have a reason for that user to have access to that OT device from his computer that was in a part of the network that traditionally shouldn't have been able to get there to begin with. And now we've blurred the lines. So that's what's happening, I think, today, is that IT and OT is now starting to merge into one overall security umbrella. And I think companies are needing to change their way of thinking when it comes to a security program, because that needs to be part of their overall plans as well, including their vulnerability plans and how they're doing risk management.
Yeah, that's right, because what companies are doing is they're rushing to digital transformation or automation, right? And now it's all about the data, right? One, how do I get access to know how my critical systems are working, or the data coming off those critical systems, or the just normal systems that run my business? How do I automate those, right? Whether it's sensors for access control or turning water on and off, or life safety systems in a hospital, or whatever it is. It's all about, how do I automate? How do I get more access to that data, more control over that data, which now marries right into kind of IT.
Yeah, Michael, you're absolutely correct. And what I've noticed too with companies is that they're in such a hurry to get all of this out, and in a lot of cases, rightfully so. I mean, they have a reason to get it done. But one of the problems that I've seen, and I was actually having a lunch with a person that used to work for me on my security team, and we were talking about one of the problems that companies and security teams has, and the IT department specifically, is that they're not even doing fundamental stuff correctly. And if the fundamentals aren't done correctly, There's no way you're going to be able to even bring in a security program over top of a program that's not doing fundamentals. This has rapidly changed so quickly. Cyber has almost been sprung on us overnight, that why people are thinking of it now. They're realizing that we should have been doing this years ago to get where we are today, but we didn't. Now we've got to play catch up. There's a lot of companies that are in the mode of, or should be in the mode of, a reset. Let's get back to basic IT stuff and get the fundamentals correct, and then you can start overlaying other things a lot more efficient, including security on top of that stuff. Even down to redesigning some of the systems that they have probably needs to be done. Now, whether that's ever going to occur in some companies, who knows, because that's resource intensive and going to cost some money. I see that as one of the problems that is going on, that fundamentals hadn't even been carried out.
And that's why we really try to communicate this to every company that we speak with. But you'd be surprised on how many organizations are not following a compliance standard, right? They're making decisions internally. They're trying to muscle through it to a degree, when there are very good compliance standards out there that they could follow, whether it's CIS controls or NIST 800, 171 or NIST 800, or ISO 27001, where you get a ticket at the end. There are compliance standards that are already set, that are out there that you can follow. And if you just follow that, you're going to be doing the majority of the things that you need or are required to be safe and secure. And then on the OT side, if you have a heavy, OT environment, it's follow that compliance standard that best fits that environment as well. And that's where we see compliance standards now being forced on states and specific industries and sectors, is because they weren't doing those things. They weren't going about it correctly. Government or agency steps in and says, well, now we're going to require you to.
Yeah, we had a conversation, or I had a conversation with someone on LinkedIn about that not too long ago, about how is everybody feeling about the government jumping in and starting to mandate things with cyber. And then the whole conversation ended up being, well, if we're not going to do it, they're going to come in and do it. So what do you really want? You go off and get your stuff done correctly and do your fundamentals, or the government's going to come in and start passing laws and requirements that you're not going to necessarily like. And I think that's kind of where we are. Mm-hmm. I hate to see the politics in all of this, but you can see the politics playing out right now, because it's a quick win for a lot of politicians to jump in and make something that's on everybody's mind and turn it to their benefit.
That's right. And we're seeing it in two other areas, right? That are now, all of these worlds are colliding. One is insurance. So everybody who went out and got a cyber liability policy, those renewals are coming up. Well, those new applications, they have increased ×4, right? The amount of controls and requirements for you to even get that new cyber liability, policy. And then on the financial part of it, a lot of private equity, venture capital, banks, Sarbanes-Oxley are now introducing a lot of cybersecurity controls inside of their requirements and policies for you to get debt financing, perform an M&A transaction, private equity, so on and so forth. So there's many other areas that are all coalescing together that are forcing effectively companies to address this security. Yeah. But like you said, that OT is still on those fringes where they leave out sometimes, but it's coming.
Yeah, it is. And, you'd think that with history, we would tend to learn from our mistakes, but it seems like it's just, I don't know why we don't learn from our past, because we've got so many different areas that we knew things were going to go the way they were, but nobody wanted to jump in and head it off, before regulation occurred, or before a law was passed, or before someone else got involved. I think everybody just wants to just wait it out, and there's really no one out there taking the bull by the horns and being that main leader in this area. I think it's all being defined, and in your cyber insurance area is exactly like that same thing. It's so new to them that all of these ransomwares that have occurred over the last 3 years caught them by surprise, and it's cost them a lot of money. And as you mentioned, it's nothing this year for companies that had cyber insurance not to be able to renew, or if they were going to renew, it's upwards to, I've heard even 400 to 500% higher than what it was last year. And the requirements that they're imposing is going to be costly to get. And even if you can get insurance, the coverage that you thought you had last year has been cut in half for this year. So it's catching up even to the cyber insurance industry.
We have that $1 million deductible.
$1 million deductible. Yep, that's exactly right. And even seeing, I can remember having the conversation, Jeremy, several years ago about insurance companies when they were first starting to bring this out was not paying. Part of the policy was to not pay the ransom. And then it turned, well, we'll pay the ransom in our policy. And then when it really hit and it started all these ransomwares occur, that's when they backed off and started thinking, well, maybe we shouldn't be paying the ransom. So, it's hard hard to tell where this is going to go, but it's a big disruptor in the insurance industry. There's no doubt about it.
You're talking earlier about segmentation and isolating industrial control systems from the rest of your enterprise architecture. Well, about a year ago, during Super Bowl weekend here in Tampa Bay, up in the Oldsmar water treatment facility, somebody was working in the night shift and saw the cursor moving on their screen and saw somebody come in through TeamViewer, remote desktop access, and change the sodium hydroxide levels of the water to 100 times normal. So they're basically trying to poison the water supply.
Mm-hmm.
So there's just a myriad of questions that are raised there. Why would you allow, remote access software through to an ICS control? Why was this not, air gapped? And, where was the whitelisting to make sure it couldn't come from an unknown IP address? Why isn't there not multi-factor authentication? It appears that they had shared accounts on there and shared passwords and reused passwords. There's so many problems there that it just starts making you think about how fragile our critical infrastructure is. And in fact, I just saw a story last night that there were something like 476 reported attacks on water supply, power grid, and other critical infrastructure over the last year. This one group called Conti out of Russia,
Mm-hmm.
one of the ransomware groups, has they specifically, like some of the ransomware groups feel like they're, I don't know how to say this, but they feel they operate ethically because they don't go after hospitals and healthcare and emergency responders. But these guys in Conti have no such qualms. That's their specialty, and that's what they go after the most. And they've made hundreds of millions of dollars over the last couple of years. So actually, at the upcoming B-Sides Security Conference, a talk that Michael Mallon, who's another security engineer at Abacode, and myself are going to give about Conti Ransomware Group, because one of their inside members dumped a bunch of information recently, and we were able to sift through it and see all their internal communications. We saw their tools, we saw their internal hierarchy and all this stuff. So we have, we know exactly how these groups operate now. So it helps us, erect better countermeasures and defense against them,
Yeah. So I think what I'd like to do now is I'd like to hear from you, Jeremy. If you could pick 3 points out of any of the topics that we've discussed, what kind of 3 points would you want to bring out for a user that is very interested in this topic?
So that's the name of the podcast, isn't it?
3 Point Cyber.
All right. Well, I think number one is including operational technology in your overall cybersecurity plan, and make sure that plan aligns with the best practices framework, as Michael said earlier, would be my number one. Number two would be have a means to continuously monitor your environment, right, for misuse and abuse of these devices. It's difficult, as I said before, because they don't have a lot of log data that they generate, but there's other ways we can watch them. For example, we didn't discuss this earlier, but AI and machine learning is a way that we can actually keep tabs on network devices that don't have, what we can do is essentially understand the steady state of the environment. And then if we see something happening that's out of the ordinary or an outlier, we alert on that and we go investigate it and try to, fix it. And I would say also have an incident response plan in place, right? When something does happen, know how you're going to react to that, how you're going to shut it down, how you're going to contain, constrain, eradicate the threat, remediate, recover, and, improve for the future so it can never be a problem again in the future. And I guess that's part of that remediation recover is keeping your patches and firmware up to date. So we talked about that earlier. That's part of the plan as well. My 3 points are really interconnected. Have a plan, continuously monitor, and then remediate, recover when you do find something.
Very good. So, Michael, I'm going to ask you the same question from a different perspective because, being the CEO, I doubt if you're the guy that's sitting down on the computers a lot doing this technical work. So talk to me. What would you think the 3 points that you would take out of this conversation?
I agree with Jeremy on the make sure that IT and OT are unified, fully integrated, but I would make sure that the board of directors, the CEO, the CFO are involved from the beginning.
Good
one. So that's number one. In the overall program, plan, implementation, maturity, they have to be involved. There should probably be a cybersecurity and compliance tiger team. When you have an incident response plan or you go through a tabletop, you usually, get key stakeholders together. So I think the CEO and the CFO should be on that tiger team, right? And then third, definitely I would follow, a compliance standard, absolutely, that involves, both IT and OT. Make sure you follow a standard. You become certified if you can, if that's a requirement. But all of that should funnel to the board and especially the CEO and the CFO.
Right. So, Andrew, is there anything here you would like to say here?
So I haven't said anything during this podcast. I've been I've done a great great job. I've been.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Listening.
I'm sorry. I just woke you up. I apologize.
Yeah. Yeah. So, but something just keeps going through my mind when I was listening to y'all talk, and I may be off base on this, but I keep thinking of, movies and TV shows that show high security companies, with security guards, and they're straight laced, and people really don't like working there. And you mentioned the evolution of CEOs from salesmen to literate in finance and now security thing. Well, if they were originally salesmen, then they're probably coming from a Wild West shoot 'em up kind of background where they may just resist security because they think it's too hard and it's not going to make my work and the atmosphere here fun. So how do you overcome that? Maybe is a question to ask.
Yeah, the two things there are probably most CEOs who don't engage properly are, one, they don't speak the language, so it's an uncomfortable conversation, right? It's a different language for them. And two, they're trying to go fast. So just like product development, maybe they have an opinion that this may slow them down and they want to go fast.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Today, that's off the table. You can't think that way.
Like Dave said, we were talking before about government intervention, through legislation and a lot of this. And I'm sure the thought has crossed other people's minds, but, the other way that government influences behavior is through taxes. So wondering if there's at some point, somebody shouldn't offer, tax breaks for companies that, meet certain security requirements. Maybe that's a different way to go rather than legislation.
It's a great point. No, it's a great point.
Idea.
I mean, because they're doing it on the insurance side, right? They're talking about, hey, if you implement X, this will reduce your policy, Y.
Right.
And so, yeah, things like that. I mean, that's the leadership at a governmental level that could happen, probably should.
Yeah, I think what we're seeing is that move toward government entities that they have power over the private sector. And you're seeing things being required. Like, lately the president passed the one bill where reporting is required now on cyber attacks, but that only deals with government entities, not private, not private companies. But I think you're right. I think incentives are what's going to grab a lot of people's attention. I mean, it's not a bad idea at all. So we've been having a great discussion here on information technology and operational technology security with Jeremy Rasmussen and Michael Ferris of Abacode. And guys, I've really appreciated the conversation and I'm glad you could join us.
Our pleasure. Thank you so much for having us.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
Thank you for listening to 3 Point Cyber, a production from Alpha Omega Advisors. If you have questions about this episode or have a topic for discussion or a guest you would like us to have on, please email us at 3pointcyber@gmail.com. That's 3, the number 3, point, P-O-I-N-T, cyber, C-Y-B-E-R, all one word, 3pointcyber@gmail.com. We encourage you to share this podcast with others. This podcast is owned and produced by Alpha Omega Advisors. The theme song was created by music producer Andrew Van Wert in Nashville, Tennessee. This is Dave Summit, and until next time, keep on learning.